Welcome back to the Community Review on Hot 92.3. I'm Josefa Salinas, your host. Well, she's been gone for a little while. We haven't had her on in a while because she's been so busy writing these amazing books that are so necessary in this day and time. Everybody remembers our friend Shireen Shirkawi. She's been with us for years now, helping listeners fight their way through this incredible mess that we're calling the mortgage and real estate industry nowadays. She's written a couple of books, Build Credit, Build Wealth, and Save the American Dream. Both of those books are available online at SaveTheDreamBook.com. But she's on the phone with us because I said, you know what? Things aren't getting any better out there. We need to bring Shireen back to talk about this. Good morning.
Good morning, Josefa. So good to be back with you. We started this together almost 10 years ago.
Yes,
you
we
can believe
did.
That.
Oh, I know. Can you believe that? Jeez.
Yeah, if we would have played
Known
this in Vegas, boy, what we predicted.
Oh, I tell you what. Well, there's so much going on out there, Shireen, and especially right now, they even with all the infusion of this money for this and this money for that and, save the world.
Right.
It seems like the banks and the corporations are getting saved, but the average person is not. So people continue to lose their homes. But I'm seeing that in some situations, a lot of it could have been prevented if they had had the right information. So let's talk about the current state of the industry, and then let's get into some walking through people, how they can help themselves or where to go for help.
Absolutely. It is unfortunate when some of the programs were put into place, like HAMP, which is the government mortgage rescue program, and other programs. The idea, and even when the different lenders received money and support when they were struggling from the government, the idea was that they were going to lend money out or they're going to mitigate foreclosures. And so by lending money out, people would have been spending the money to better the economy, investing back in their businesses. And if it was a matter of mitigating mortgages, if they really were focused on that, then we really could have caught this much earlier on in the game. Currently, right now, the foreclosure numbers in our California alone, and I know you're heard nationally, but California's numbers are skyrocketing. San Bernardino being right now one of the highest out here in this sort of Los Angeles outskirts area. It's really suffering in record numbers. And right now, currently, the banks, unfortunately, are overwhelmed. It's two fronts right now. There needs to be accountability on both sides. As it pertains to the bank, they have major issues with their systems. They have an issue with the way they take in the customer that's applying for a loan modification. They really are not putting the right people in place that really understand the mortgage business, but a lot of intake people initially that are just looking at numbers and not looking at much else. They don't have a solid system that they really qualify on. So, for example, Josefa, we've talked about loans over the years and how do you get a loan and what your credit score should be. At least consumers could prepare. They understood going in, this is what I needed to get a home loan. But this loan modification world that we're in is a nightmare. The Treasury Department has created certain guidelines for the HAMP program, and the lenders are to run a person's information through this sort of guideline system that's set up, and it can give you an approval or denial. But that system is vague to the average person. We really don't have a clear understanding, even as advocates and as experts in the industry, as to what that one lying factor that can exist that's hidden that could possibly have a consumer turn down on a loan. And so the two key things right now are, and we've positioned ourselves in the middle as we always have, that from 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Is to find a place of mitigation. And that place is, the lenders tell me, they feel that the majority of people's homes are foreclosed on for one or two reasons. Either they went in and it's completely over their head, or they're not communicating currently with them. And 70% of people who lose their homes never call the bank. So that's the two major problems the banks have. The problems consumers have, I don't understand how to put my package together for a loan modification. I don't even really understand what it is. Can they lower the interest? Can they lower my principal? How long does it take? If I'm not approved, can I go back? What paperwork do I put together? And then their worst thing after they do that is, how do I get it to the right people? because most of the banks, and I bet you many of you right now, if you're up drinking your coffee, listening, are going to say, that happened to me. Most of them are telling consumers, we've lost your paperwork, we can't find it, you have to resubmit it, and then you resubmit it and it goes back into Wonderland. And so right now the key is for consumers, first and foremost, to empower themselves by educating themselves on the process. Number one, and understanding their financial situation. The banks can work on creating better mitigation systems so that they can help consumers along the way and have more accountability measures in place when they're mitigating these foreclosures.
It seems like if I've got 100 homes and I raise the interest rate and now the people can't make the payments because the interest rate has caused their payment to go up, but they were making those payments just fine at the previous interest rate, it seems like it'd make more sense. Why don't you just let them have the lower interest rate because they were able to make those payments?
You know, I agree with you. And here's, I think, the toughest part for consumers to understand. Some consumers look at their mortgages and say, hey, look, isn't it better for you to let the payment stay where it is and I can still afford the house and you don't foreclose on me because you're going to lose money in the end? But everything depends on who owns that loan, whether the loan is being actually serviced by the bank, owned by the bank, whether it's a securitized mortgage, and what a securitized mortgage is. And this is something that many reports have been out on. The secured mortgages, which most of you have, are mortgages that were put into pools together and then sold collectively, and the risk was dispersed among all investors. And so your loan and my loan and 20 other people's loans are actually in this securitized mortgage, and these loans are being passed on from one bank to the other, which leads us to the thing that's been going on, and currently 30% of homeowners are in court right now, and they've frozen their foreclosure because the bank cannot show proof that they even own the property. Each one of us has a right, if someone is filing a foreclosure, to ask them to prove that they have the right to foreclose. And you do that by requesting the original note. And in order to request the original note, it's a form letter that you can find in my book. And you can get that at SaveTheDreamBook.com. It helps you to challenge the bank and ask them for proof of ownership. And if they cannot provide you with the original wet ink deed of trust, the wet ink note, a photocopy does not prove that they own your note. So if a servicer, let's say Ocwen, Linton, Bank of America, either hold a loan or service a loan. Servicers don't actually own the mortgage. They're just collecting it. If they do not send you that original note, you can challenge them all the way to court, because there's been a story where a woman was foreclosed on in the Midwest, and years later her creditor came after her for the money she owned because the people that foreclosed did not hold the original note. Now, to go back to your question on is it better for them to just do that, some banks have insurances in place, Josefa, and it benefits them more to foreclose on your house. Let's talk about IndyMac Bank, which is now called
they're called OneWest. Yes,
Bank.
yes, OneWest.
Let's please talk. It's very important we talk about OneWest Bank. If any employees of OneWest Bank are listening right now, you really need to advise your president that he is not disconnected from the people's homes that he's foreclosing on. It is the only bank that I have tried to deal with so far that has given complete resistance in communication. Let me give you guys a quick background on what's happened with IndyMac and OneWest Bank that makes it more feasible for them to foreclose on you than to modify you most of the time. IndyMac Bank was shut down a few years ago and taken over by the FDIC. When that happened, the FDIC reorganized and cut a deal with an ex-Goldman Sachs employee and two other top executives in order for them to start OneWest Bank and buy the assets and the toxic loans and of everything else of IndyMac Bank. When they did the agreement with them, they sold them the first deed of trust a certain cents lower on the dollar. Let's say they sold it to them 70 cents on the dollar. They did that with second loans as well. But they told them that if any of these homes foreclose, they will pay 90% or 100% of the losses, which really is greater for them to make than it is to mitigate the loan, because the FDIC has agreed to pay not only for their losses, but even for that 30 cents that they never paid on the dollar in order for IndyMac or OneWest Bank to be made whole. So the incentives that they put into place, go to YouTube and put IndyMac deal with the FDIC. I challenge you to read that story and look at that agreement.
So what happened to this big, push from Obama, save the people. We're going to save these homes. Americans can't lose their homes. But Americans are losing their homes every day.
Yeah, I really don't feel that this administration put the right consultants in place. Although I was a supporter of the administration, I'm not with any party. I'm with the party that really gives a darn about the people. And in this case and in this housing market, the proper measures were not put in place. From the beginning, when we gave them the money, we did not stipulate to them they have to mitigate. For God's sake, Josefa, the government owns the majority of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and they're not mitigating foreclosures for consumers. They're foreclosing on homes. So a government-ran entity, a government-owned entity, and an entity that we've put millions, billions of dollars into is not even mitigating our foreclosures. Instead, what we've now done by having these foreclosures is that we've increased the level of crime in many communities. We've lowered the taxes that people are paying. So that means a lot of different services and cities are now going, from seniors to school to police officers that we have on the road. Fires are increasing according to the fire department in certain areas where there's more blight. We've affected our communities, not to mention that these kids who are being relocated from their homes can't even live in the same neighborhood anymore, because now their family's credit is not strong enough to even get a decent apartment or a place to live or a place to lay their head down. We're really in a major crisis situation, and the election year is coming up. Calling your Congress people, each letter is looked at as 16,000 letters from their constituents, which means your priorities right now should be, we want HAMP extended, we want better programs to mitigate our foreclosures, we need things in place to help save our communities, because the housing industry is only the second largest sector in this economy besides jobs. If we really want to get ourselves back on our feet, we have to find a better system. For God's sakes, the banks don't have the simplest things in place to really be able to mitigate loans to save everyone, from the homeowner to their investor to the economy.
Well, I know for sure I'm not hearing too many success stories. Like, with all the money that we're spending, our tax money and all this government money to save these banks and say into the mortgage industry and save these programs, I should be hearing hundreds of families on news stories and things saying, yes, it worked and it saved my family's house.
No.
Why is it? Why?
We're not. Unfortunately, we are going against a huge animal. Let me give you, really, this will give you as clear as I can get. The Justice Department did an investigation of some of the top lenders, and they found that even after everything they've done in the past year, they've lied to the government on the foreclosure so that they can get more money from the government for their foreclosure losses, which is fraud. So the banks recently told the Justice Department, we're willing to pay you $3 billion, but we want you to go to all the attorney generals across the country, who, by the way, most are suing banks, and we want you to tell them that they have to hold us harmless from everything else that comes up on any of these. But the Justice Department had only audited less than 2% or around 2%, somewhere in that area, a ridiculous amount, which was clear that there was major issues with these loans that these banks had. The Justice Department actually has aggressively been reaching out to stop that with the attorney generals. In California, the attorney general, wonderful woman, came out saying she was going to start this mortgage fraud division, go after banks. Within a few weeks, she came out and said her budgets are cut, and that's one of the first departments that she's shutting down. Unfortunately, the banks lobby at a judge court level. They have lobbyists. They are paying commissioners that are sitting on the finance commission. Chris Dodd, for example, was being given donation money by one of the top a few of the top Bank of America executives. And when I did my research, many of those executives were not even Democrats, which Chris Dodd is, and he was the head of the Finance and Banking Commission. Most of them were Republicans, but they put their money into the heads of all these people in the committees that they need in order to control how they move in this industry. Well, it starts there. As a people, we should not be okay with money from the medical industry going to people that are regulating it, just like money shouldn't be going to the people in the financial industry and the government that are regulating the financial industry. Or else, how do we really, truly regulate? Who holds who accountable? It's just a lot of money moving, Josefa, and I don't say all this to say that modifications are not being done. I've had many modifications through our nonprofit done. Some of those modifications I'm not happy with. Guess what? The Treasury Department allows some of those modifications to happen. And that's something you and I have talked about on these balloon payments that I'd like us to touch base on.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about some of the modifications that are out there and what you need to look out for.
Absolutely. So the way the Treasury Department basically created the program is that the key is to get the consumer to 31% on their mortgage to their gross income. So if your income is $10,000, your mortgage shouldn't be more than $3,100, 31%. Now, that's your first. If you have a second mortgage, they don't even care, which is not good, so they're not even taking your second mortgage into consideration. They told the banks that the way to go about achieving that 31% of gross revenue, that's before your taxes, is by first lowering the interest rate. So if your rate is at 5%, they would, let's say, lower to 4, then 3, then 2, and the bottom lowest rate they could go is 2%. But let's say at 2%, you're still not at 31%. Then they tell them at that time to re-amortize the loan. Re-amortizing means if you were in a 30-year loan, stretch it out over 40 years so that the payment can be lower. However, if you have a loan that's securitized, like we talked about earlier, that's in a pool with a bunch of other loans, you cannot change the date of maturity, which is the date that one of those loans would be due. So if it's due in 2020, you can't change it to 2030 because those loans are all combined together. They all mature on one date. So what they do is they change the schedule to a 40-year schedule. They stretch out your payment. However, your loan is still due in 2020. So in 2020, let's say now they've lowered your payment to $1,100, and they did this to a family. This is Bank of America, and I fought long and hard with the bank about this. They lowered a family's payment to $1,100 from $3,000, but then in 18 years, they had a $180,000 balloon payment on a house that's currently worth $120,000. So after they pay the interest, the balloon payment, and everything else, they'll have paid about $420,000 for that home that's worth $120,000 in Riverside. So the government actually, through the Treasury Department and through HAMP, has okayed these balloon payments, which were really one of the original predatory lending types of loans that got people in these positions even before the recent mortgage crisis. Balloon payment programs are one of the worst and unethical programs you can ever put a consumer into. You have a consumer in a house and the house is only worth $120. Their credit usually has been shot because if they were in that situation, it's affected their credit. And so now you're hoping that in 18 years, that house is going to become worth 400 and some thousand, or it's going to have enough money in it to pay the 180 balloon. The person's credit, usually people who've had setbacks, unless they really take control, which is really important. They haven't fixed it. Now they're sitting on worse credit, no equity in the house. The balloon payment is due. What do? If the bank says we can't modify you, then you lose your house. When a balloon payment is due, that's it. You pay that 180 today or you lose your house. And so it's put people in worse situations, and it's only pushed things forward for our kids now. A few years down the road, the industry will collapse again. Why do banks do that, Josefa? Because it looks like they're modifying more mortgages so that they can keep their books solid, their shares solid for their consumers. I mean, B of A stocks dropped from 3 years ago at $42 to around $7 and some cents now. And so all these companies are trying to maintain their stocks. And to do that, they were running and doing these modifications. The third thing the government says is reduce principal, meaning if someone is upside down on a house, reduce some of the money that they owe you so that they can be more even, and what they owe can be more even to what the house is worth. Now, for this to really work, it should be that the rate and the principal are lowered together to create a more realistic position for a homeowner so they're not just leasing their own home. For that family that was offered that deal from Bank of America, it was more feasible for that family to walk away from that house, and within 2 years or 3 years, they could have bought an FHA loan with 3.5% down even after foreclosure than for them to stay tied into that property. So they're pushing consumers into these foreclosures with these ridiculous balloon payments. You've got to tell your Congress people that you want the HAMP program changed. You want principal loan reductions, or else everyone's going to be in property that's upside down. No one has any ownership. There is no wealth building here. You might as well just lease a property or move on and get another property in 2 or 3 years, or do a short sale and let that be on your credit, or a deed in lieu of, which is turning turning the home into the bank. So those options are there, and I discuss them in my book, but you really have to move realistically. I don't want families to move in a position of fear. You know how I am about that, Josefa.
Exactly.
You know, it's not a fair place. I've been going through it financially in the last few years because my business completely ran on this financial industry. And one day I went from a full staff and offices running to all these banks sending faxes in saying, we're no longer honoring this deal we said, no longer honoring this, no longer honoring that. And all of us were sent out to scramble. So people really need to take financial inventory right now. Make a decision for your family and put your budget together and really see what can I afford. Learn what the bank needs and for the buzzwords and the paperwork that has to be together and your hardship, and those are things that I talk about, and I can give you a quick list, Joseph, as to what to prepare for a loan modification. But that preparation and education and honestly, guys, patience and moving without fear, because you're in the driver's seat right now. The majority of the banks cannot prove they own the properties. And so if you educate yourself, I'm telling you, follow my tips. I've been able to save people's homes an hour before foreclosure. Don't ever call me about something like that. I'm not putting this out there as
right.
ever. All of us should be calling the bank way before an hour before foreclosure. But if you do find yourself in a position that your house is being foreclosed on today, you wake up in the morning and you procrastinated, your most and probably the quickest option is to file a BK. And then you can call the main number that holds the foreclosure. Your BK attorney should know that, and that would at least stop your process if it's in that same day.
Okay, well, if they want more information, they can go to SaveTheDreamBook.com, where they'll find Build Credit, Build Wealth, and also Save the American Dream, the ebook and workbook. And Shireen, you are always such an amazing wealth of information. And if somebody wanted to reach you and they needed some help, they could reach you. They could find you at SaveTheDreamBook.com?
Absolutely. They can email me at SaveTheDreamBook.com, and I would love to, I'd love to come out, our foundation, to speak at your schools, your churches, anywhere, so that we can help get your staff or your team or your members on their way to their homes mitigated.
Well, congratulations. Community Building Blocks is actually out there. One of the few nonprofits that are really, really trying to help you stay in your home. If you've got problems and you need some help, SaveTheDreamBook.com is where you will find Shireen and her team. Shireen, thank you so much for being with us. You're always a wealth of information, and I'm sure this is not the last time we are going to be having this conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Stick around. There's more coming up on the Community Review Hot 92.3.